After 4 years of IVF and countless needles, Jacob Matthews and I are finally going to have a child. When I was about to tell him the good news, I saw him holding a boy. The child called him Dad. 1. When Jacob came back, I had already smashed everything in the house. The servant was so scared that he hid in the yard and called Jacob. "Sir, the wife is crazy again." The house was too big and I was so tired that I sat on the carpet. Jacob walked in, dressed in a suit and tie, and looked down at me. When I didn't say anything, he unbuttoned his coat and threw it casually onto a pile of glass. "What's wrong again?" His voice was tired and impatient. I grabbed the broken vase nearby and threw it at Jacob. He seemed to be prepared and dodged it easily, but my actions still angered him, and he pulled me up and dragged me to the bathroom. "Look at you now, you look like a lunatic." I followed his gaze and didn't notice that my pajamas were torn in several places. The lipstick was smeared on her face, the area under her eyes was black, and her hair was disheveled like a female ghost. I didn't want to see myself like this, but Jacob wouldn't allow me to. He held my chin and forced me to look at my terrible self in the mirror. "You also know shame? Have you ever thought about how I feel? Going home every day to face a lunatic, I have to be on my guard every day, worried that she will pick up an ashtray and smash it on my head one day. The scar on his forehead has faded a lot, but it is still visible." This is what I typed. "Why did you hit him?" I thought about it for a long time. Come to think of it, he had a child with that female secretary. I turned to him and said, "Is Emily Roberts's child gone?" His eyelashes fluttered slightly and he nodded. "No more." For years ago, he answered me the same way. So who was the little boy he was holding at the hospital entrance today? The child called him Dad. 2. Jacob took me to the hotel and his cell phone was placed on the bedside table. I took it and looked through it naturally. Checking his phone had become my muscle memory. In fact, there is nothing in it and there will never be anything. But I still have to watch it, only then will I feel at ease. Jacob came out of the shower, glanced at the phone in my hand, and a sarcastic smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Did you find anything?" He handed me a glass of red wine. I held the phone up to him. "Why did you give Emily money?" $500,000. "Why?" "This is the transfer record from half a year ago. I have questioned him about it before and he gave me reasons. As for what it was, I have forgotten. I took antidepressants for 2 years and they damaged my brain. Although I have stopped for many years, my memory is getting worse and worse." His eyes swept over me, and when they landed on my face, a sudden surge of disgust rose in him that was difficult to conceal. My hand loosened and the phone fell on the bed. "New." I quickly got under the quilt, turned my back to him, forced myself to fall asleep, forced myself to forget the look just now. In the middle of the night, Jacob left. He answered a phone call before leaving. He whispered to coax the other party, but it seemed that he didn't coax the other party well, so he hurriedly put on his clothes and went out. I felt nauseous and rushed to the bathroom to vomit. I stared at myself in the mirror and asked, "When should I tell him that I'm pregnant?" 3. 4 years ago, I decided to have a baby. The reason is simple: Jacob seems to like children very much. When I asked Emily to abort the baby, he got really angry and finally he agreed only after I threatened to commit suicide. He said he couldn't bear to leave me, never in this life. I believe it. So I wanted to give him a child. During the 4 years of IVF, I have been pierced with countless needles. Just yesterday, the doctor told me that we succeeded. Jacob and I are going to have a baby. This was our wish when we were 20 years old, to have a child, preferably a boy, so that I could play ball with him and protect me together. If I hadn't seen him, Emily, and that boy at the hospital gate, my 20-year-old dream would have come true. My head was in great pain and I squatted on the ground, pounding it hard. When I recovered, I felt much more relaxed. The next morning, Jacob came back. "I am pregnant." The room card in his hand fell to the ground. "What?" I repeated it again, and then stared into his eyes closely, not daring to miss any of his expressions. He looked at me quietly, neither happy nor bored. "That's a good thing. Do you really think so?" He nodded. "Of course." Then he naturally picked up the room card, took off his coat at the entrance and walked into the bathroom. He doesn't want this child. We have been in love for 7 years and married for 6 years. I can understand what he means just by looking at him. Why? Is it because he already has a child? It should be. When I was depressed because I couldn't get pregnant, he always comforted me by saying that what is destined to happen will eventually come true. Are all my previous efforts just a joke in his eyes? He was like a spectator in the audience, watching me jumping up and down on the stage and making a fool of myself. When he was in a good mood, he would smile at me, and when he was in a bad mood, he would close his eyes and pretend to take a nap. I rushed into the bathroom and he quickly turned off the water. What on earth are you doing? Before I could say anything, tears started flowing. Jacob pulled a bathrobe from the side and put it on, then pushed me out. Jacob, do you have a conscience? I've suffered so much to have this child, and this is your attitude. He grabbed a cigarette beside him, lit it and took a puff. What should my attitude be? It's the same again. Every time I break down and go crazy, he is always so calm and composed. You bastard, you have no conscience, you. Shut up. Jacob threw the cigarette on the ground and grabbed my shoulders with such force that my entire arm went numb. Jessica Thompson, did I ever say I wanted a child? This is all just wishful thinking on your part. You want to use a child to tie me down and consolidate your position. Don't fucking involve me, he said and pushed me down on the bed. I listened to his roar, a little stunned. He really didn't say that. Jacob sighed. I was too impulsive just now, are you okay? I threw the pillow in his face. You were willing to give Emily $500,000 and buy her such expensive jewelry. But you didn't say anything when I got pregnant and you yelled at me? In the past few years I have been following Emily's Weibo and trying to compete with her in everything. She is younger than me, has a better figure than me, and is sweeter than me. I can't compare to her in any way. So Jacob fell in love with her and had a child with her. Why did you give her money? Why did you buy her things? A bracelet worth more than $3 million, which he specially picked for Emily's birthday last year. My birthday present was just a silk scarf that my assistant gave me casually. Jacob looked at me steadily and suddenly laughed. You should have said it earlier. He turned and left the bedroom, and came back a moment later with his wallet in his hand. What do you mean? Before I could even ask the question, he threw a card in my face which hurt my eyes. Is that enough? What? He took out another card and threw it to me. I caught it subconsciously. Then he threw another one to me and finally threw his wallet at me. Is that enough? I looked at him blankly. What do you mean? His expression was cold, but the next second he put on a frivolous smile, his narrow eyes devoid of warmth. By the baby in your belly? If that's enough, then don't keep talking about it. It turns out that he wanted to buy the baby in my belly. I opened my mouth to explain that I wasn't arguing with him over money. On the contrary, the money he gave me was enough. When the words came to my lips, I felt as if ice water was poured over me from head to toe, and my heart was completely chilled. No, you've given me enough. I bent down, picked up the cards one by one and put them in my wallet. The money you gave me before is enough to buy the baby in my belly. You don't need to give more. Go to sleep. I'm tired. After saying that, I turned over and got into bed. Jacob stood there for a long time, and finally kissed me on the hair. I'm sorry. Jacob and I met in college. He is in the junior college next door. The students there have poor grades but are number one in causing trouble. So we all avoided it for fear of getting ourselves into trouble. But Jacob is different. He was different from those boys and was very quiet when he was pursuing me. He secretly brought me drinks and breakfast, and followed me home at night. He never expresses his love for me openly, but he always cares about me shyly and awkwardly. Since I was a child, my family has taught me to be well-behaved, dignified and quiet. He took me to see the sea and to the river to enjoy the evening breeze. When I was bullied by boys and my parents asked me to be more tolerant, he climbed over the wall from the neighboring school and beat up the boys. In the end, both of them were injured. The boy had a broken arm and Jacob had broken ribs. In my sophomore year, I agreed to his pursuit. I was going to prepare for the postgraduate entrance examination, and Jacob also studied hard. We spent almost all of our 3 years of dating in college in the library. We were admitted to the same university as graduate students, and Jacob was so happy that his eyes were red that day. He said, "I'm afraid you'll abandon me. I'm afraid I'm not good enough to give you better." He said, "I want your parents to leave you to me with confidence. I want to make my little princess the happiest woman in the world. After that day, his birthday wish every time was, the best for Jessica. But this was not enough, so he dropped out of school to take out a loan and start his own business. I was worried that he would lose miserably, and Jacob was afraid too. Finally, I comforted him and told him that at worst he could just start over. He did it. He gave me the best. The best house, the best clothes, the best jewelry. When he started his business, he was humiliated by others because he had no money and power. He persevered and said that as long as he thought of me waiting for him at home, he didn't feel any pain at all. I was kicked out of the house by my parents. He hugged me with heartache and secretly begged my parents to let me go home. When the company was on track, he bought his first house and invited my parents to live with him. He knelt on the ground and begged the elders to agree to our marriage. We got married when the company went public. I became the happiest woman in the world, at least in the eyes of others. I turned and looked at Jacob's sleeping face. When did he change? And why? Jacob left before daybreak. I also went to the hospital for a checkup. As fate would have it, I met Emily and that child again. 5. Not only the mother and son, but also my parents-in-law were there. Jacob arrived soon, subconsciously standing between us. The whole family protected the mother and son, and were wary of me. When did you know that? He asked me, frowning. I told him the truth. He thought for a moment, then turned back and told Emily, "Take the child home first." My parents-in-law immediately took Emily and the child and ran away. "Go home first." I obediently followed him into the car. Even though I had already destroyed the house, we still went to the hotel. He took a few deep breaths and looked at me calmly. "He is my child." I didn't speak. "He has a congenital heart disease and needs surgery recently." I nodded and said okay. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes, as if he was shocked why I didn't make a hysterical scene like before. I was also very surprised. I should have made a scene in the hospital. No, he should have rushed over and grabbed Emily's face and pushed Jacob onto the road to be hit by a car, and killed him the first time he saw the three of them having fun together. But I didn't. Why? How about this? Jacob took out his phone and searched for something. "I'll ask my assistant to take you on vacation to another city." I lazily sat on the bed. "Pregnant women can't take planes in the first 3 months. Didn't Emily tell you?" His face turned pale. "Don't be so sarcastic." I sighed, stopped talking, and waited for his next plan. "If you can't take a plane, then take the high-speed rail. In short, I must be sent away. I guess the deadline is when his precious son has his surgery done? Good." His throat rolled. "Jessica, I will make amends to you after the child has finished the surgery. It's no longer needed. 4 years ago, he said he would let Emily abort the baby and he would never let me down again. But they teamed up to deceive me and let the child grow up to 4 years old. Now I'm being deported." Jacob's phone rang, and it seemed that something had happened to the child again. He rushed out without even looking at me. Blood is thicker than water. My mother was right. As long as the child stayed, Jacob would never look back. I had a very long dream at night, dreaming about the mountain where Jacob's hometown is. On the top of the mountain stood my boy. He smiled at me while holding the sour dates in his hand, his eyes sparkling when he looked at me. I started crying while eating, and he was so scared that he was in a panic. "Jacob, why would you do this to me?" He was stunned, his arms around me stiffly, and he didn't say another word. The next morning I went to the hospital. "Doctor, are you sure you want to abort this baby?" "Sure." 6. I was lying on the operating table, and because I had chosen general anesthesia, I soon lost consciousness. When I woke up again, there were only pale walls and a strong smell of disinfectant. In the evening, Jacob called. His tone was anxious and a little angry. "Where have you been? You didn't answer my call. What do you want to do?" I cleared my throat. "Nowhere. I'm in the hospital." He was silent for a moment, then quickly started asking, "Which hospital did you go to see Emily?" I couldn't help laughing. It turned out that he was afraid that I would go find Emily and hurt their child. He asked me coldly, "What are you laughing at?" Yeah, what am I laughing at? Maybe he was laughing at my naivety, thinking that as long as I didn't let go, we could still be the same as before. I thought that as long as I stayed in this marriage, my original vows would not change. I always believed that Jacob loved me. He was just tempted by the novelty like most men who suddenly became rich. As long as I'm still here, as long as I'm behind him, he will come back one day. My wishful thinking is such a huge joke. Jacob, I beat the kid. Jacob. I don't want to go on vacation, I don't want to go crazy and smash things, I don't want to take a lot of psychiatric drugs. I don't want to forget who I am all the time. I don't want to stare at your phone every day. Call your assistant every day to ask about your schedule. I don't want to secretly smell your shirt in the middle of the night to see if there is another woman's scent. My throat was hoarse and a little itchy, and my eyes were blurred by tears. Actually, what I don't want the most is to remember our past. Remember how much you loved me. I want to forget all of this. Jacob, let's get a divorce. 7. I looked at the 4-tube and felt very calm. It turns out that saying these 5 words is not that difficult. On the contrary, I feel very relaxed after saying them. Jacob didn't say anything, I just heard his heavy breathing. After a while, he murmured to me as if waking from a dream. You don't want the child anymore? I have suffered so much for this child before. Now that it's been aborted, it's understandable that he would find it hard to believe. Are you taking revenge on me? His voice was trembling and choked. I admit that at this moment I felt very happy. Why am I the one who suffers all the time? But soon I realized the original reason for aborting the child. I had a purpose in mind when I decided to have him. I wanted to keep Jacob and make him come back. At this moment, I also felt happy that his departure made Jacob sad. Am I probably the most selfish mother in the world? Jessica, I will let Emily take the children abroad. They won't disturb your life. I promise I won't let you see them again. I couldn't see his expression when he said this, but I imagine it must have been one of fatigue and compromise. This is your business, don't tell me. As for the divorce, wait for me. Before I could finish my words, Jacob appeared at the door of the ward. His coat was soaked, and I then realized it was raining heavily outside. Jessica! He called me urgently. My nose felt sore and tears started falling. He hasn't called me like this for a long time. Why are you so stupid? I was just talking nonsense last night because I was angry. Do you really not want our child anymore? He came over and hugged me, being very careful not to hurt me. Are you feeling unwell somewhere? He called the doctor again and asked me about my physical condition in detail. He didn't take my request for divorce seriously at all. I'll go to the university and buy you your favorite cakes later. Okay? Fine lines appeared at the corners of his eyes, and his eyes were not as clear and bright as before. He wore gold-rimmed glasses that made him look more mysterious. He is no longer the same as when I was a teenager. Jacob, let's get a divorce. He froze in his coat-grabbing motion and turned to look at me. Are you serious? I nodded and said yes. He tightened his grip on his coat and looked at me intently. Then after a moment, he slammed the coat against the wall. Why? I've already told you that I won't let Emily and her son appear before you. What else do you want? I shook my head and said, I don't want anything. I just want a divorce and a good life. He was so angry that his chest heaved. Divorce and then live a good life? You have watched too many TV dramas, right? Do you think you are still the 18-year-old Jessica? If you leave me, do you think you can live a better life than now? In the past, I would have thrown a pillow at his face. But at this moment, I really want to ask him, do you think I have lived a good life these years? His brows relaxed and his lips parted, but no words came out. My throat was sore. Jacob, you've driven me crazy. You've made me the person I hate the most. What else do you want from me? Do you want me to die? He raised his head suddenly, swayed a little, and held on to the table to steady himself. Let's get a divorce. If this continues, I will really die. He didn't answer me and staggered out of the ward. After I was discharged from the hospital, I lived at home. My parents also noticed that there was a problem between Jacob and me. Did you make Jacob angry again? My father suddenly asked during dinner. I didn't quite understand what he meant. What? He glared at me and said, Jacob is just a good-tempered man. If I were another man, I would have kicked you out long ago. I laughed out of anger. Am I the one who cheated? Am I the one who had a child with someone else? My dad was shocked. Another child? I sniffed and told him about Emily. However, my biological father's first reaction was not to feel sorry for his daughter, but to blame me. With your behavior, it's no wonder Jacob is looking for other women outside. My mother was so angry that she poured the soup in the bowl on his face, and the two started arguing again. I held my chest, had difficulty breathing, and quickly ran out of the house. As soon as I went out, I ran into a broad embrace. Oh, so anxious. Anthony Clark? 8. He was wearing a dark windbreaker and holding an umbrella in his hand, looking at me with his back to the light. Why do you look like you don't recognize me? He suddenly came closer and looked me in the eye. Are you still asleep? I quickly came to my senses and asked, why are you back? I'm back. As far as I can remember, he seldom wears such dark-colored clothes, which is why I was a little distracted. Anthony and I grew up together, and he often said that I was his follower. He had no idea how much I didn't want to follow him. My father worked in the Clark family company, and Anthony had excellent grades since he was young and was always at the top of the class in everything he did. He became my role model. Even my parents, who were always at odds with each other, were surprisingly unanimous in wanting me to learn from Anthony. After going to college, I finally left my parents' sight. Finally, I don't have to follow Anthony around and pretend to ask him questions anymore. However, he went abroad after I got married and was away for 6 years, during which time he seemed to have only come back once. It happened that I was ill and unconscious, so I didn't remember him. Are your uncle and aunt home? I want to bring them something. Oh. I quickly opened the door and imitated my mother's words. Come on. What else do you want to bring? He looked at me teasingly. My parents' quarrel stopped abruptly. They were much happier to see him than to see me. Will Anthony return to his home country to develop in the future? Anthony suddenly looked at me and nodded. Yes, I'm back. He only sat for a short while before his phone started ringing nonstop, so he left in a hurry. My parents looked at the gift and thought, does Anthony have a girlfriend? I have no idea. My father glared at me in dissatisfaction. You are about to get divorced, so you should pay more attention to your future affairs. His words made my mother angry again. You are selling your daughter again, you old bastard. The two started cursing again. I hid back in my room. The next morning, I asked Jacob's assistant and found out that the child's surgery was complete. I went to Jacob's company to find him, and he promised me that he would divorce me after the child's surgery was completed. When I went there, he hadn't arrived yet. When he saw me, he sneered. Are you in such a hurry? Certainly. He tightened his jaw and said nothing. I took the divorce agreement out of my bag. I had been drafting it for almost a month. Do you have anything to add? He had a gloomy face, looked a little haggard, and did not move. I looked out the window. The sky was gloomy and I was afraid it was going to rain. I didn't have time to care whether he was feeling unwell or not. I just wanted him to sign quickly so I could go home. I forgot to bring an umbrella today. Fortunately, Jacob took the agreement and read it. He said before that I wouldn't be able to live well without him. How could that be? Although he is a heartless man, he really made a lot of money, which is all earned by my husband and me. So, even if I leave him, I can still live well. Have you finished reading it? Do you have anything to add? I asked again. His Adam's apple rolled slightly and his eyes were red. He just glanced at me and picked up the pen to sign it. My heart finally settled down. Before lunch, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get our divorce certificate. I have to say, there were really a lot of people queuing up to get their divorce certificates, and we almost had to wait until the afternoon session. I send you. No need. Before I could finish my words, a black Kian stopped in front of me. Anthony got out of the car and asked loudly, Are you divorced? 9. The corner of my mouth twitched and everyone around me looked over. You haven't left yet? You're taking so long. So embarrassing, what should I do? Just laugh it off. Divorced. Anthony smiled. Let me see. Ah. He looked innocent. Divorce certificate, let me see it. I gave him the divorce certificate in my bag. He picked it up and examined it, nodding his head and commenting, It's much better looking than the photo on your marriage certificate. Really? I also looked carefully and it was true. It might be because I was wearing makeup. Jessica. Suddenly I heard Jacob's gnashing voice. Why is he here? Anthony chuckled and pulled me to his side. Get married. Jacob's face changed drastically. He took a few deep breaths and fell backwards. Anthony was stunned. He's dead just like that? I was so angry that I hit him and said, Call 120 now. Jacob's lips were pale, sweat was oozing from his forehead, and he clenched his teeth tightly, looking extremely painful. What's wrong with him? Anthony asked. I shook my head. I don't know. Over the years, Jacob only went home once or twice a month. I know very little about his situation. Although we are husband and wife, we have long been from two different worlds. After sending the man to the hospital, I found his cell phone in his coat. The password is actually my birthday. I haven't changed it in years. I guess I'm just too lazy to change it. I found Emily's phone number and called her. As soon as she picked up the phone, she said sweetly, Jacob, where have you been? The kids and I miss you. My nose suddenly felt sore. It turned out that they were even more intimate than I thought. He's in the hospital. Come over here and I'll send you his location. After saying that, I hung up the phone. Anthony stood beside me and raised his hand to pat my shoulder, then thought of something and put his hand down. Emily came over quickly, and when she saw me, she asked, What did you do to Jacob again? She pointed at me and said, He has already married you. He even gave up his son for you. What else do you want from him? You crazy person, if you don't feel sorry for him, I do. Bang! Emily covered her face and looked at me in disbelief. I took my hand back, it felt so good. I should have given you this slap years ago. Her eyes were red, and like a cat with its fur standing on end, she threw her bag to the ground and pounced on me. What? Anthony stood in front of me and pushed the person away. Emily was pushed to the ground because she didn't control the force well. I walked up to her and looked down at her. I heard that your parents are teachers and haven't retired yet. Should I go ask them why they raised such a daughter? She hasn't even graduated from college yet, but she's already in a hurry to become a mistress. Her face turned pale and her eyes were full of fear. You see, as long as there is something she cherishes, she cannot be indestructible. Next time you see me, take a detour. As a mistress, you should know some rules. Emily got up, patted her clothes, and didn't dare to say anything more. The doctor and the nurse wheeled Jacob out. He had woken up, his eyes fixed on me. Jessica. Jacob looked so fragile and reached out with difficulty to hold my hand. I turned aside and looked at him coldly, just as he had looked at me before. Jacob's hands froze in the air, and something bright flashed in his eyes. Jessica, stay with me, okay? I glanced at Emily beside me and said, No, we have nothing to do with each other anymore. After saying that, I pulled Anthony away. 10. Where are we going? I took a deep breath of the fresh air outside the hospital. I am really liberated. I let myself go. Where do you want to go? I thought for a moment and said, I want to go to my grandma's place, but unfortunately, she has been sold. He shook his head and said, I bought it back. I live there now. The cherry tree is still there. It's about the old house of the Clark family, Anthony's grandmother's house. Our Anthony does his homework there every weekend. There is a cherry tree in the yard. He tricked me into going up the tree to pick cherries, and then he wouldn't let me down. I was so scared that I cried on the tree, and he was laughing so hard that his stomach hurt below. Anthony's grandmother swung her crutch and hit his legs a few times before he obediently walked to the tree and carried me down. During Anthony's sophomore year, his grandmother passed away. Anthony and I cried our hearts out. This is the only thing Anthony and I have in common, and that's where we get the most love. Grandma Anthony did everything she could to love and protect us. We had the easiest few years under her wing. After he left, Anthony was forced to learn the business and become a man. I face my parents' quarrels every day, and there is no way to avoid it. Even my dog was thrown away by my father. If Anthony's grandmother were still alive, my parents wouldn't dare disobey just one call from her. Don't be sad, Grandma wouldn't want us to be like this. The alley was much cleaner than before. As soon as we walked to the door, we heard a dog barking inside. It sounded like a big dog. You still have a dog? 11. His eyes darkened, and without answering, he opened the door. As soon as the door opened, a big golden retriever rushed over, sniffed all over me, jumped up happily and licked my face. But why does this golden retriever look so much like Cherry, the cat I raised before. It is already old, but the look in its eyes is so similar. Until I saw its broken tail, this was really my cherry on top. Cherry. The dog licked me even more happily. Really, cherries? Anthony looked at me somewhat reproachfully. What else? It's not dead. I was confused by his sudden anger. What do you mean? Didn't my dad throw away the cherries? Don't you know that Cherry is here with me? I shook my head. How would I know if you don't tell me? I was a little angry. Jacob and I had hardly slept for a month while we were looking for cherries. We searched every place in the city, big and small. As it turned out, it was here with Anthony. He took out his cell phone, found QQ and opened it. The above is the chat record between me and him. He said, Cherry is here with me, don't worry, don't tell your tyrant father. I quickly replied, yeah, Anthony. How do we place him? Why don't we keep him at my house first, and then when you graduate and rent a house we can take him back. It doesn't matter which one of us keeps him. Me. Whatever, I don't want it. Anthony. Don't want what? Cherry. Are you crazy? Me. Well, no, you can throw it away or eat it, it's up to you. Anthony sent an angry emoji and said nothing more. There was a big question mark in my mind. When did I ever say such a thing? Besides, I snatched Cherry back from the dog meat shop. I spent all my pocket money on her and took good care of her for 3 years. How could I bear to say such things? If it's not you, then who is it? A figure emerged in my mind, Jacob. There will be no one else but him. Anthony sighed. It's my fault too. When you were dating, I didn't go to you to confirm it just to be angry with you. I was stunned. Why are you angry? He realized he had said something wrong, blinked and quickly turned around and walked into the house. Come in and sit down, it's very cold. The cherry tree is still there, the cherries are still alive, and it still remembers me. I held it tightly and said, I'm sorry I came to see you at this late hour. As I was talking, I actually started crying. Don't cry, there's still time for everything. Yes, it seems like nothing has changed. In the evening, he and Cherry took me home. As soon as I entered the door, I heard my parents arguing again. Fortunately, Anthony was not allowed in. When my dad saw me coming back, he pointed his finger at me. You are such a loser. Jacob's hospitalization is such a good opportunity, and you just gave it to Emily. My mother immediately retorted. If you like Jacob so much, why don't you go and serve him? My dad was so angry that his face turned blue. He continued, I've met that Emily. She's better than you in every way. No wonder Jacob chose her. My mother snorted. Then you become Emily's father. My dad threw the lighter in his hand at my mom, and I joined the fight. I don't know how many times I was hit in the end. When they were tired of beating me, I felt sad and my shoulders were in great pain. My neck was also scratched with several cuts. When I was about to go to bed, my mother suddenly came to me. Jessica, what do you think about me divorcing your dad? I nodded quickly and said yes. When I was a kid, my birthday wish every year was that they would get divorced. I didn't want to follow anyone, I wanted to go to an orphanage. They always start with my problem, then argue, fight, and finally blame everything on me. If I were better, they wouldn't quarrel. If I had been more sensible, they wouldn't have quarreled. I didn't feel loved by them, not at all. What kind of parents can make their daughter feel a little loved? They didn't want to separate and said it was for my own good. However, I did not become a better person because of them. Instead, I became more and more afraid to go home, and became more taciturn and cautious. Have you always hoped that I would divorce your father? My mother looked at me steadily and suddenly burst into tears. A week later, my parents went to the Civil Affairs Bureau and had a fight there. Fortunately, they got divorced. It was natural for me to move out of my home. Anthony accompanied me to rent a house, packed everything, and we had hot pot and watched a movie together. When the show was over, I suddenly wanted to know one thing. Jacob's company was short of an investment before, but it was quickly replenished. Was it you who gave it? 12. I asked Jacob about this and he said he was a business partner. But how could he know a business partner worth tens of millions? That period was when I graduated from graduate school. I seemed to see Anthony on campus and then I called him and he said he was abroad. I also thought I was dazzled. After the divorce, my brain suddenly got better and I connected these two things together. You came to see me on the day I graduated from graduate school. right? His face was hidden in the dim light, but his eyes were still bright and clear. Really? I asked again. It's you, isn't it? He was silent for a moment and nodded. My nose felt sore and my heart was depressed. Don't feel burdened. He thought for a long time but couldn't find the right words. Finally, he said, I want this to happen. Fool. Teen. I had always wanted to travel, but Jacob said I could only wait until he was done with his work, so I waited for 6 years. Now I don't want to wait anymore. Anthony looked me in the eyes with burning eyes. I don't want to wait anymore. We went on a spontaneous trip, being the most tiring travel special forces and taking the most rustic photos. But every one of me in the photo is smiling. It was half a year before I came back from a trip. When I got off the plane, I was a little dazed. I can't seem to connect who I was before with who I am now. How did I become like that? Obviously, I have many dreams, many ideas, and many places I want to go. Gradually, the only places I wanted to go were Jacob's office, Jacob's hotel, and the dinners Jacob attended. I wanted to see if he was fooling around with another woman behind my back. Looking back on it now, it's really scary. Anthony took me back, and as soon as the car drove downstairs, I saw a familiar figure. Jacob stood there. How come he has lost so much weight? His suit is empty and looks ill-fitting. Jessica. His eyes fell on Anthony. You and him. What's the matter? I interrupted him. I just want to see how you are doing. He looked me up and down, trying hard to control his emotions, but the tears in his eyes still betrayed him. I was a little confused. Was he crying out of jealousy? Jacob lowered his head to hide his embarrassment and said with a choked voice, I went around the school that day and our tree was still there. I thought about it and realized that he was talking about the tree, a tree that we planted ourselves. On Arbor Day, he ran into our school and said he wanted to leave something that belonged to us. Then what? His body was trembling slightly. There were still tears in his eyes, and he looked helpless and fragile. I'm sorry, I should have told you earlier. You said it. I interrupted him again. You said it many times. He closed his eyes tightly, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, I never meant to hurt you. I don't know why things have turned out like this between us. I've always loved you, but what have I done? He said as he slapped himself a few times. I just looked at him quietly, without any ripples in my heart. If you're done, we'll go up first. It's really hot. He didn't speak. I pulled Anthony upstairs. After we finished our meal, I opened the curtains and looked down, and Jacob was still standing there. He stood alone under the lamp, his back looked lonely and thin, as if there was a barrier between him and the world. What are you looking at? Nothing. When I looked again, he was gone. 14. A month later, Anthony confessed his love to me. I think we missed each other for too long. I dare not say that I can take care of you completely, nor do I want to treat you as a porcelain doll that needs to be taken care of, but I can promise that you will be my first choice when I can. I will love you seriously, well, and wholeheartedly. As he spoke, he began to cry, wiped his tears, and continued. I just hope you can give me this opportunity, so that we can get closer. Let us walk into the future together, cherish each other, love each other, and achieve each other. I don't know if I cried or not. I just remember that the moment I nodded, Anthony's tears fell on my face. Cool. I thought I would never believe in love again, but Anthony made me want to love someone again. The human heart is like a leaf. With a wormhole in it, sunlight can pass through. A year later, we were ready to get married. I like roses, red roses. I remember when I was a child, the only time my father gave my mother a gift was 3 roses. Mom cried for a long time. During that time, we would smile whenever we saw red roses. After the roses withered, the quarrel began again. Don't worry, I won't let any withered roses appear in my house. Anthony had already planted a mountain of roses before Jacob and I started dating. Our roses will never wither. That night, I saw him write in his diary. Loving someone is like growing flowers. My roses are so beautiful. My parents came on the wedding day. After the divorce, they became friendly and amiable. My mother would pick up food for my father, and my father would help my mother put on her clothes. I changed into my wedding dress and was about to go out when the waiter came in with a package. A gentleman gave it to you as a wedding present. I opened it and it turned out to be a will from Jacob. 15. He left all his property to me. I don't know how to deal with this. Why did he suddenly make a will? The friend then said, Jacob died a month ago. What? He's dead. My friend nodded and said, yes, he didn't let me tell you, saying that he wanted you to prepare for the wedding well. I put the will down, went out, and walked towards my groom. Anthony started crying again. Before we started dating, I didn't know he was so fond of crying. But I cried too, and neither of us could laugh at each other anymore. In the evening, when I was counting the red envelopes, I suddenly remembered my previous will. Anthony wasn't surprised. He's dead, did you know that? He nodded and looked at me cautiously. I know. He said Anthony had come to see him the day before he died. He just told me to take good care of you and asked me to say sorry to you on his behalf. I had a strange feeling in my heart. I never thought Jacob would pass away so suddenly. He has stomach cancer. I suddenly wanted to say, look, tell him to stop eating and drinking so much. On second thought, he also wants to make money. Considering his family background, it is not easy for him to work hard to get to where he is today. Are you angry? No. There's nothing to be angry about. I just feel a little sad that this is how things ended for Jacob and I. Jacob sent Emily and her son abroad, never to be able to come back. He did it, and they never appeared in my sight again for the rest of their lives. In fact, I no longer care. I just want to live a good life with Anthony and don't want to recall the past. I donated part of Jacob's money to several orphanages and some animal rescue organizations, which can be considered as a good deed for him. Anthony and I have been living in Cherry Courtyard. Just two of us and a dog. There is no greater happiness in life than this. End.